Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Effective Technology Integrations series here. My name is Rob Dominic, and we have a special treat for you all this week with all of our ambassadors, or most of our ambassadors here are going to be talking about synthesizing the strategies that we talked about in the last couple of weeks, bringing it all together. We did touch on, TPACK and SAMR specifically in the second week, and now we also touched on Tim's model, the Triple E, and the PICRAT model. So all the acronyms you can think of right there for you. But we're going to review them all again and kind of talk about what we like about them, what we dislike, how we might actually use them. What does this look like realistically in the classroom as opposed to just the theoretical and learning about it in that PD or in the books that were recommended. So we've got a few outlined questions here that we'll go down through. Kind of each one of us talking about the benefits or limitations of the strategies. If there is one particular that stands out for each person here, and then finally, realistically, what does that look like in the classroom for all of us here? And hopefully this sparks some ideas or some conversations within yourself or some discussion with your colleagues about these strategies and what that looks like for you in your classroom. So we'll just kick it off. The first one that we talked about before is the SAMR model. Just to recap real quick, it's got the various levels of integration to it. Talking with the simple substitution, building all the way up to redefinition, and the substitution augmentation of the enhancement pieces, followed by the transformation for the modification and redefinition. All right, so with that, then I'll kind of open it up and let my colleagues here we can start discussing about, what do we like about this? I'm going to take some notes as we go, and then all of you in virtual land can access these PDFs afterwards and see our notes about this as well. So the SAMR model, again, is probably one of the most common ones that are first introduced to teachers. What do we think about that, guys? What do we think, positive or negative? What comes to mind for you?
This is definitely the first and probably the only model that I was ever introduced to as a classroom teacher. So when I started this position, this was the model that I knew the best. And I think one of the things I have learned that I didn't necessarily understand as a classroom teacher is that it's not a hierarchy. So one isn't better than another, but the way that it was laid out or the way that it was presented to me maybe made it seem like, the ultimate goal was always, getting to that top level, when in fact there are definitely pluses, positives to be had at every level.
Okay.
Yeah, I would really like to build on that. And I'm gonna put a sticky note on the Jamboard of a couple different resources. So I like to think of it as a pool. And sometimes you dive into the deep end of the pool, and sometimes you stay in the shallow end. And the trick is knowing when to push yourself to the deep end. And so I like more of a modified model that does allow that flexibility. So, because sometimes substitution is all you really need, but it's not like a goal of every lesson. I think it's looking at the totality of what you do when you integrate tech into your classroom. Are you swimming in the deep end? Are you pushing yourself where you can push yourself? And if you're not, then what keeps you stuck in the shallow end? And making sure that that you're doing a little bit of both, and pushing yourself where you need to. So I put in, what's her name? I put in a couple resources about erasing the line and a pool, and talking about how that this is much more fluid, and we need to be flexible with our thinking when we're talking about the SAMR model and and how we're using it for transformation.
Yeah, right. Really good points there, both of you as well with that, because that's something that we talked about, or I mentioned last week with that, is that not everything has to be dynamic. Not everything has to be, completely crazy, redefining everything you're doing with the tech. It doesn't always apply there. It can be whatever level of tech allows for. Enforcing the technology into different spots it doesn't really go well, right? It's not going to go that well when it doesn't belong there.
So I just put in kind of a expansion of that in my experience, which is that if I only teach SAMR, people who are already technophobic or self-defined, not techie, push back immediately because it seems to say, as Kate said, there's a better way than you're doing it, and the place to go is the place where you're most likely to drown. And that sensibility can be really contrary to your overall goal, right? Of trying to get people to actually meaningfully integrate. So can you go to the next slide for 1 second, Rob?
Yeah.
I put TPACK in again just to remind people. And one of the things that I've found when I teach SAMR and sort of introduce it is if I pair it with TPACK and I say, your pedagogical knowledge is extremely valuable in this process, probably the most important thing. Your content knowledge is also really important, but it can be expanded and you can and should, of course. So you're always learning as a content specialist. Those two things are already really well merged. And what I'm trying to do is just give you some more access to the pink circle, to the technology options that will allow you to enhance your existing expertise. And if I do that, it is much less likely for people to be as affronted by the conversation. So now if we go back to the SAMR model for a second, for example, I will give them an augmentation tool. And you had said, at the outset, how do you use this framework? I will look at something that offers an opportunity that might expand their understanding students' understanding of the subject that the teacher's already really familiar with, so that the exploration isn't simultaneously like feeling insecure about it and feeling like the students are going to be the ones with the expertise and that they're totally out of their depth, literally. And that has helped to give some context. An example of the augmentation one that I give is a world language teacher in my school who does one-on-one conversations with she's here in the US and she has a classroom that she works with in Latin America, and they just at the time that they started this Skyped with one another, and now they Zoom with each other for conversations, right? It wouldn't be possible without the technology there in place to allow for it. It massively improves the opportunities for the kids to speak Spanish and to teach English. And yet it's not really, that's what my friend says, rocket biology, right? Like there's no huge hurdle to get over, and yet it's really transformative. So something like that, where I want to give, I don't want to say low-hanging fruit exactly, but something that will really make people feel confident and immediately see the benefit, and then from that build more. So depending on what your role is, if you're an integrator like Holly and I are, then thinking about how you're going to introduce SAMR. And if you're Kate, thinking about how to make sure that colleagues are understanding it isn't a hierarchy and that you can offer examples as you try to move, as you're an ambassador in your own district for better and more thoughtful integration, that you have given them those concrete examples that don't feel judgmental, right? Those people that are already nervous can really tank the whole session with everyone in the room if they don't feel like they're getting some immediate, buy-in or some opportunity to see the value.
Yeah.
Can I build onto that a little bit? Because I think as an integrator, the SAMR model is really helpful for my thinking. So when I'm, when I'm working with other educators right now and I'm thinking about where they are and where they'd like to go or what they'd like their students to create, the SAMR model is really helpful. But as a classroom teacher, looking at that model with everything else that we have going on, it's missing some important pieces. The students, it's very heavily focused on technology. So there are no, goals or objectives, students, there's nothing about empowerment in here. So it's missing some big pieces that are really important to classroom teachers. Again, it has its place for sure, but I just think that there are some missing pieces depending on what lens you're using to view it.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think that's one of the pieces with it too, that it's purely tech-based, and tech doesn't always equate to engagement and learning and extension for the students. It depends on how it's used and all of that. I've seen sometimes a SAMR model kind of with graphics paired up with like a Bloom's taxonomy table as well, and kind of mixing that and matching that. And that's definitely at least better, I think, at times, where you can see what level of creativity or analyzing or whatever the students are going to be doing with that. Because redefining, it doesn't always make things like that completely engaging for the students. It's not always completely student-centered. You're right, with this model, it's still tech-based or teacher-based. And then even at the redefinition level, you're not always getting complete engagement for the students. There's things you can do in the classroom as a teacher that you couldn't without the technology, but it still doesn't mean the students are actively engaged in learning with it.
Yeah, I
Nice.
think it's important for us to remember that we're not trying to transform the teacher. We're not trying to transform the students with this. We're trying to transform, if wherever possible, what is the lesson, the product, what it is that you're delivering to students. And so kind of take the onus off of teachers feeling like we're trying to change them. And it's like, I'm not trying to change you. I'm just trying to help you see if there are ways that technology might take this great thing that you already do and redesign it so that it has something transformative that students, and when we say transformative, we mean this is something that couldn't be done if we didn't have the technology, right? That's
Right.
what you kind of have to think about.
Yep.
But like I said before, I don't think, and I think we've all said this, that it's this flexibility thing. It's not this hierarchy. It's not, it's not necessarily just because you're going deep in the technology, you're not necessarily. You have to kind of be thinking about all of those things as you are starting to apply tech integration.
Right.
And be flexible.
I think a lot of that's going to be the basis too for a lot of these other strategies that we talk about as well. It just, each one has their kind of unique way of approaching those concepts with that. So let's then talk about, did you want more with that, Jonathan, or was this the point with before that you're good with?
Yeah, just be able to reference it. We were talking about that.
Perfect. Yep. Good. All right. So then here we have the TIM matrix, technology integration matrix. It's TIM. I don't know if I say TIM matrix. It's like saying ATM machine where the M is already embedded, but it feels weird without saying the matrix part. So to be honest, this one was the newest to me when I was looking at tech integration stuff. This matrix that lays out the various levels of integration, similar to the SAMR, and then here that's got more of a, how is it being used part to it. So, I like that it does incorporate that other, how is it being used in the classroom, active, collaborative, constructive, authentic, and goal-oriented. So it starts bringing in those pieces as well. So yeah, anyways, I'll get some your positives first, I guess, because there are some other problems that I see with it. So what do you guys think about this one that you like or dislike?
I'll start with this one. So I see this being most useful is like either self-evaluation, or if you're a tech coach or tech integrator and you're getting ready to go through a coaching cycle with a teacher or a group of teachers. I see this, that's where this matrix for me, it would be the most useful. I think if you tried to do it with every tool, it would be too cumbersome, or every lesson even would be. But this gives you a great like general feeling about where they, again, I think it'd be a great self-evaluation. Like, where do I really see technology fitting into my classroom? What are my, what are my approaches to it? What are some of the challenges that I have with it? So, how do I think about technology as I use it in my classroom? That's where I see the benefit of a matrix like this.
Yeah.
I find the matrix very overwhelming
Yeah.
as a classroom teacher. So as I'm thinking about, how I'm working with my students to meet standards or, our class goals, and also thinking about incorporating technology into that, then coming to this tool and trying to find my place in the tool, it's very big, and to me, I'm just completely overwhelmed when I open this tool up and look at it as to, where to start or how this might be helpful to me in the moment, which is often how teachers work. So I love the idea that Holly has about self-evaluation or coaching cycles and really being able to dig into this tool that way. But from just a classroom teacher perspective, on the daily, this is probably not a tool I would turn to for that kind of, quick work that we're doing.
Yeah, that was I agree. That's why I was see what you guys had to say about it first. In your day-to-day operation, I could not imagine using this. It's like lesson planning or whatever, and like laying everything out with your lesson plans. And as you go along in the career, like you're probably not doing that as much. Like this would be good for that coaching piece, but on a daily thing, I don't think I'd be able to reach the depths that it wants me to.
Also, the way it's laid out, I was saying before we started recording that it strikes me that it could, like the one we were discussing earlier, could be misinterpreted as hierarchical, meaning that the bottom right-hand corner would be the best place to be. And I think if you read it, I don't know how you would lay it out differently so it didn't read that way, but across the top, there is the implication that you're trying to go further to the right. And as you work your way down the left, as if somehow those are better and better versions of teaching. And so I think it would be really important if you were utilizing it to make sure that you began with that sense that it was not hierarchical and that it offers you, as Holly said, like that opportunity for reflection and sort of like a way to conceptualize your use of it. And goal setting sounds like a great way to do it as well, but not to try to achieve it in that it isn't it's not like a, I don't know what the word would be for it. It's not a continuum where there is an ideal behavior that's represented by the lower right-hand corner.
Yep.
The other thing I noticed about it too is that I did like your initial question, but what advantages does it have? I do like that it maps on the type of learning. So acknowledging what Kate said earlier about SAMR not really being student focused. If you read the columns down the left, it does give a sense of like what your classroom environment is like and sort of what your focus is going to be for a particular activity. And by doing that, if you then get away from the hierarchical nature and just say, all right, how might I integrate technology? How might I think about technology integration in a collaborative learning space? That that nexus, I guess I would say, is a helpful lens. Like, is this going to be an effective tool if I want a high level of integration and I know I'm collaborative? But as Kate points out, that's not like a Monday morning question for yourself, right? It's more like a unit planning question, or if you're looking, Holly and I have talked a lot about how do you develop a scope and sequence for technology skills and like how complicated that can be, because what do you mean when you say technology skills? But if you know that, seventh graders are supposed to be able to utilize collaborative Google Slides effectively to make engaging presentations by the end of 7th grade. So you have that written somewhere or sort of defined, even if it's just your own goal. This could really help you figure out where to bring those skills to bear, and kind of where you want to focus on them. But it isn't something you could just, whip open on a Monday morning to figure out how today's class is going to go.
But definitely more of a coaching or unit planning aspect. I agree. Absolutely. Okay, pretty good. I like it. Moving right along now. So this PICRAT model, they originally had it as just the rat. It replaces, amplifies, and transform. I think that was supposed to be kind of similar to the SAMR piece. But Royce Kimmons and all of at Brigham Young University had incorporated this PIC part of it, kind of talking about how the technology is used for the students. I like that it kind of boiled things down to simple aspects of it. Sometimes with a SAMR, even at Tim's, a debate, or where am I with this? Is it augmentation or is it modification? Where does it blend in? And not that, debating that too much makes that much of a difference, but it kind of eliminates that piece where there's just a middle section. It's a low, middle, and high. That part can be kind of nice and simplify it, I think, while also using the students' perspective of what they get to do with that technology. That's what I saw first with this one anyways.
I think this one's helpful for, for me, for an example, I'll just give an example, right? So if my students are watching a flipped lesson on video, that's great. But if I use this model to think about what else I can do or what else they can do while they are watching the flipped lesson, then it can help me to come to tools, like Edpuzzle, right? Otherwise, it might just be passive. And so if I want to move it, I know my students aren't going to do well with just passively watching my flipped lesson. So then what does that look like at another level, moving over, up and down in the matrix? So again, it puts the student focus back in, which I really appreciate as a classroom teacher.
I love the simplicity, and I really appreciate the student participation piece, because they often get left out, like what their role is in all of this. And honestly, that should in some ways be the primary focus, right? But I do feel like there is still this sense of hierarchy about this, that you're still trying to get to that, that upper right corner, right? So that students are being creative and it's transformative. And I think with any of these models, we still have to recognize that not every tool is going to be that or should be that, right? Or not every activity or everything that you do needs to be that, but it's being reflective over your teaching as a whole. So if you're in the PR all the time, like, then how can you push yourself so that you're moving towards that upper right hand corner, and picking and choosing the places that could happen. So I could actually see this being an evaluative tool as you're looking at your lesson plan, like, and maybe even start like recording, like how many times do I meet each of these categories, and really start looking, because I think that as much as we as ambassadors and as integrators, and we're really trying to inspire you all to integrate technology in transformative ways that we know will engage students and enhance everything you do, we can't force you to do that. So in a lot of ways, it's still like, how can I be reflective over my own practices and find ways to push myself. And that's when your tech integrator or your ambassador or a coach or whoever you have connected to can help you. You can say, look, I'm stuck. Like, I went through my unit, and everything I do when I include technology is like a PR. So like, can you help me find ways to move outside of that and towards the CT.
Very good point. Yeah. I like that with that charting and then being able to draw in the coach's help or the integrator's help.
Um,
yeah.
I didn't know much about this model. I'd heard about it. I think I'd been on to one presentation on it, but as I was researching a little bit before we started today, Royce Kimmons, who's the one who created it, has two statements in an article about it that I thought would be helpful just to frame this piece and also the conversation more broadly. The first one was, technology integration models are theoretical constructs that guide researchers, educators, and other stakeholders in conceptualizing the messy, complex, and unstructured phenomenon of tech integration. I was like, wow, this person actually knows my job. That's exactly what so much of my time is spent trying to like make sense of, you know, the mess. But also this article emphasizes the role that this can play in teacher education, which I thought was a really cool framework for it. So when I went through to get like everything I know, and one of the reasons I joke that I took this job was to learn how to do my job, because everything I know I've learned on the fly. Like one of the ambassador who isn't here, Eric Wade, has actually taken graduate classes in tech integration with the goal of being a tech integrator. I've never done that. Like everything I've learned has been through experience. And so someone saying to me at the outset, you know, how might you think about the role technology is going to play in your classroom? Here is a lens to use and organize what you know sort of intellectually and in your gut, but don't have the words for it. That would be really valuable. And then this article goes on to give 6 criteria and guiding questions for evaluating technology integration models, which, Rob, you may have looked up before. I haven't seen your prior session, but they talk about clarity, compatibility, fruitfulness, technology's role, scope, and then the last one in big letters, student focus. Does the model clearly emphasize students and student outcome? So I would echo what Holly said, that I really like that this has that piece, and that if you're asking any of these questions divorced from the role for students, then you're asking the wrong questions or using the wrong model. Because if it's not making a difference for them, right? If your goal is to be in the deep end of the SAMR pool, but students' experience be darned, well, that's not really going to get us anywhere. So that pairing, I think, of the guiding questions and the idea that it would be a way to organize it, none of these is going to be a perfect structure, but it would give us like a lens through which to look at any given tool. Or it seems like we're kind of reaching a consensus to say any series of tools or like a series of a planned adoption or planned rollout of tools could be really helpful. And we've talked a lot about getting away from specific tools, like I'm going to teach you how to use X app or whatever. But if, for example, your goal was around technology enhanced presentations, right? Rich multimedia, visually engaging presentations, how you get there isn't necessarily key. Then that to me feels like a great way to use these models. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm looking at, is that clarity, compatibility.
Yep, right. All the different pieces that they talk about there. Absolutely. I think they're well aware of that. And it goes along with that matrix, right? That's just the visual piece of it. This is kind of the understanding piece that goes along with the integration.
Mhm.
Yeah. Awesome.
And they list, if you go a little further down in that same one, they answer some of the questions that we're talking about right now with a table that's called difficulties using prominent models in teacher education, which is sort of funny that it's framed that way there. It looks just like that, but it's a little further down, I think.
Just citations were.
Yeah, it looks like it's jumping a little bit. But they talk about LOTI, RAT, SAMR, TAM, TIM, TIP, TPACK. And I think just the fact that there are all these acronyms kind of speaks to that. But they give the example that in each of these, student focus is implied in learning and the relative advantage, but it's not central. Well, if that's the case, then that may be a good sort of initial
there we go. Higher up. Yep.
cutoff place. Yeah. So I'll drop the link to this article because I think it's a good one into one of
Yeah,
the
we'll put it with
post-its
this one
there.
too. Absolutely. Whoop. Touchpad. Okay, awesome. Right along then. And then the last one here before we kind of have you choose if there was one that you're going to work with. And it might depend on your role, I guess. The Triple E framework. This is Dr. Liz Kolb out of University of Michigan that has this. And in my last session, we talked about this one and the resources online and how much they have dedicated towards it. They have a lot going for it. And it's, again, kind of categorizes things into 3 sections of extend, enhance, and engage. But it really focuses more on how is the technology being used and how does it relate to the goals of the unit or of the lesson. And it really makes the teacher think about how their own classroom strategies or environment plays into the tech piece itself. I mean, it literally has that book called Learning First, Technology Second that goes along with it. So it does incorporate that other part to it quite in depth. So obviously I like that piece of it. I like the fact that it does incorporate that part of it as well. And then it boils everything down to basically 3 questions in each section. So it's not too overwhelming. I think it's pretty useful. It's got a good balance to it, but I do think there's a lot more to it to truly understand it. That's the other piece of it too. The other ones I think are kind of quick hitters. This one takes a little bit more of an in-depth look.
I like that this one matches up, at least for me, with how I plan units. So I start with my standards and goals. I look at the instructional strategies that I'm going to use, and then I think about the tools and how we're going to get there. So as a teacher, I'm naturally thinking in this way without even having this framework in front of me. And then my thinking can be enhanced with this framework to support it, but it's just a very natural way for that. I think a lot of us think and plan. So it lines up very closely with what we're already doing, which I think is important.
I agree, Kate. I felt when looking at this model that it goes really deep into the metacognitive aspects of it, and so that might feel a little out of reach for some teachers, or like that. I mean, it's deep, right? But there is. I said I kind of have my own version of this, like when I'm looking at things like efficiency, engagement, and enhancement. So does the tool make it, more efficient? Is the task, or the product going to have a better outcome? Is it going to be able to be done faster? Whatever. Engagement, is it going to increase student engagement? Because sometimes we throw tools in just because we think they look cool, but kids, it doesn't really improve their engagement with whatever it is that you're doing. And I put in my notes that one thing we learned from the pandemic is that there are some things that we do in our classroom that cannot be replaced with digital tools. And so, I don't, we look at all these models, and I think it's great for teachers to remember, like, every lesson doesn't have to have technology in it, because there's some things that just are better without it. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that. The trick is to not get stuck in that. And really, like I said, is there a tool that's going to make this task or this product better? Is it somehow going to increase student engagement? And then does it enhance the learner's experience? Are they going to be able to practice a new tech skill that they're going to be able to use? Does it enhance the audience experience? So like that might be where, I've watched 50 Google slide presentations, but maybe the audience would be more engaged in watching 50 videos. I don't know, right? Like, is it, so you have to also think about that. Does it allow for more differentiation? Like sometimes student choice and differentiation is technology can take that to the next level. Does it enhance the activity? does it enhance research-based strategies that we know that improve student outcomes? I think of looking at Hattie and Marzano. So what are some of the top influences that we know improve student outcomes? For a long time, I did digital trackers with students because students tracking their own learning and self-reflecting on that is very high on Hattie's influence list. And I found, well, if I did this digital tracker and I made it so that it was a spreadsheet and all they had to do was they just had to put one letter in and it turned the cell a different color and they had this visual thing and students ate it up and they really liked that visual piece. So is there something like that I'm hitting on other things? So those are the things I think about when I'm looking at what tools I'm in my lesson planning process, which I think that's what you were talking about, Kate. So it's really kind of using this model for lesson planning.
Absolutely.
Rob, in our chat, I just dropped an image that I wonder if you could put up for a second. After this posted. So Liz Kolb, who created this model, was recognized this year as one of the I guess I would say lead technology people from ISTE. So Actum is our state organization of the national organization ISTE, and every year they name making it IT happen winners, and she won this as one of them this year. And in the article that describes her nomination and then winning, that one of the headings is about struggling students responding to tech tools. And she talks about how, if you look at this model here that is connected to it, that you can have the sensibility that something is reaching kids. And when you're in person with them, discover pretty quickly that it's either not working or whatever else is happening is your technology isn't adding to the teaching and learning. When we were full remote, I think a lot of people were discovering that they mistook engagement for either ritual compliance or even retreatism, where it looked like the kid was involved and engaged, but in fact, they would discover that wasn't the case at all. So I think, putting the pandemic aside for a moment, one of the questions you're asking all through this is, how are you getting the feedback from the students about the effectiveness? And the pandemic made it really difficult to do that, but also offered opportunities for, in certain cases, kids to have transformative learning experiences. And we know, for example, that kids who are on the spectrum, in many cases, removing some of the anxieties and the stresses that in-person learning created for them gave them access to learning they never had before. So now you're introduced to my loopy thinking here, but what I'm trying to say is that the EEE model gives you that opportunity to look at pros and cons and to not put a kind of cookie cutter assessment on. So to answer the question you asked a moment ago, but haven't actually asked yet, which one's your favorite? This one, which is actually quite new to me, but this idea of having an opportunity to really look at the match between the student's engagement, the tool, the student's use, the way in which it's transforming the learning, and that swimming pool isn't defined by you, the teacher's depth, but by the student's engagement. And are you moving them towards the green on this image, where it is both high attention and high commitment? In Kate's example, you're never going to teach that lesson and just hope for the best that they're sitting there doing something vaguely related to what you're doing. You have to give them a paired expectation and activity, and that kind of just asking that question demonstrates why this model to me makes the most sense as an approach. The observation that Kolb makes in this ISTE article is, I found myself integrating a lot of technology into my classroom and into my projects and in choices. They wanted to do that kind of work, and in doing so, I felt elevated knowing that I was a tech-savvy teacher. But the problem was, it was about what the tool was and not about or about how she was getting feedback, not how they were learning. And then one of you said a minute ago, when you shift it from looking at the tool as the focus to the learning as the focus, this framework, I really think, gives you a way to do that. And to me, seems like the question to be asking from the outset. Not are they, dazzled by it? Is it like bright and shiny lights? But are they actually engaged with it? And really, is it in fact transforming their learning using that SAMR concept, that they're doing something they wouldn't otherwise be able to do, and it's really meaningful. It's really teaching them something extraordinary or unique because the technology is in place to allow it to happen.
Yeah, I agree, especially with that engagement piece that you're talking about there. When my first sessions, when I just looked at the landscape of technology integration, there's a Project Tomorrow survey that surveyed teachers, and they said that engagement was the #1 benefit they thought of technology, which it does. It has its own level of engagement, its natural engagement piece to it. But as you just touched on, Jonathan, right? And with this model, like, what does that engagement do? And, is it authentic? And is it helping you towards your learning goals? Or is it just that kind of false engagement? Their kids are there, but they're not really minds on and interacting and learning from the material. Yeah, and this I definitely think helps address that piece of it, is what is the tech really doing for you? As all of you said, really, as all of you. So, all right, so we can kind of wrap the next couple questions together, as Jonathan mentioned about his favorite and what that would look like for him in the classroom. Yeah, so give you a minute to think about that. But what would you like the most, I guess, if that's possible? And how would it look like in the classroom realistically for you? For me, I gotta say, realistically, I would probably be blending myself between this PICRAT and the EEE framework for the most part. As Kate mentioned, I think some planning and tech integration would be using this EEE as I'm planning my lessons. But I would probably also be just kind of snapshot, just real quick, if things aren't completely laid out, an overall impression of how am I using tech overall. I think that using this PICRAT model for me would be what I would use to kind of reflect upon the level of integration, where I am with the technology, and if I'm hitting CT ever or things like that. Because I do like the simplicity of that, and I feel like I can use that quick and easy. And then this one would be for the planning piece. So I'm torn, I guess, between each one of them about which one I would use only if I had to choose one, because it's hard. But I think realistically, I'd be using a blend of those two in the classroom.
So we talk a lot about in technology about making sure that we're choosing the right tool for the right task, right? And so I don't see where I see where each one of these has a role. So depending on what it is that you want to do, I see each one of them being more, it will get to you the information that you want, depending on what you want to do. Like I said, as a tech coach, maybe I'm going to meet with somebody for the first time and I kind of want to get a lay of the land about what their thoughts are around technology, or do a self-reflection. So I might use that TIM matrix. If I'm looking, like you said, to get a big picture, maybe I use SAMR or the PICRAT. But then if I want to get like really focused on a particular unit, then I think that the EEE is where you go. So I think it's about choosing the right tool for whatever task that you're doing, which is really the crux of integrating technology in the first place, right? Choosing the right tool for the right task.
A really good point there, actually, with all that, because so in the matrix, the TIM matrix to start with might be a little overwhelming, as Kate mentioned, like just seeing that initially, like, whoa, right, there's a lot for me to take in, and technology may already be a little hesitant for some teachers. So that may not be the best one to start with. Might be one simple like the SAMR, since it's commonly, as one of the beginning ones, or the PICRAT as it's laid out, and then ease them in, or you progress, or like you said, you use it for different goals of lesson planning or coaching an entire unit with this teacher or something. Yep, awesome.
Can you go back one slide for a second? So on the right there, I just put in, if people have not found BAM Radio before, it is a really phenomenal mobile podcast that in this particular episode, Liz Cole was interviewed by Carl Hooker. So Carl Hooker has done a lot of work around SAMR, and they talk about this exact idea of how the two work together. And I think maybe the key takeaway for me is none of these work particularly well in isolation because they each serve different purposes. And if you're trying to like marry one of them as the one you're going to use, you're actually going to miss out on some pretty significant aspects of the others. So I'm going to revise my answer to say that my favorite of these is not actually just Triple E, but maybe the conversation that emerges with TPACK at first around how technological knowledge is great, but it's useless in the classroom. And we've all had that person that is like, we joke like should not go anywhere near students because their technological knowledge is extraordinary, but they don't do well in a classroom environment, or they know the technology but not the material, and so it's so isolated from itself that it doesn't end up being useful. So maybe that metaphor is a good one, that if we're going to say to people at the beginning, sort of the approach here is, yes, you have amazing technological knowledge, and what we're looking at is moving these circles as close together as possible till they all overlap and that center is as big as it can be. And once we know that that's the overarching goal, then we're going to use the various frameworks to figure out how to make that action, or like how to move in that direction. There's no better way or worse way to do it. There's no judgment. It's really a kind of iterative process, to use one of Kate and my favorite words, that you get to look at how a particular tool is giving kids more access to your content knowledge. And you as the pedagogue have figured out how those two work together to make it possible. So having the simplicity of TPACK may give us the best initial conversations to make the rest of these be used. I almost want to say with like a healthy skepticism that they're going to be a panacea and like make it all work for you. That instead, what you want to end up with is the mindset that allows you to use the best aspects of any of these, and to be like patient with yourself. Like if you're going to judge yourself by your failure to implement the TIM model each time you teach a lesson, well, I'm sorry, that's going to be a long and sad teaching day for you. Whereas if you use it in the as a framework in the planning stage, and then you let it go, and you're like, okay, how did I do today using, let's say, TPACK, right? Did I do a better job of making technology more a part of the classroom experience? And returning to our initial point, did it improve the student's experience? Maybe that's the simple model, right? Like throughout all the frameworks, and just ask yourself at the end of the day, was the teaching and learning more engaging, and do the kids get more out of it? Then I did my job. And cut yourself some slack that maybe the evaluator looking at this grid is going to be like, well, I'm sorry, 2A was not perfectly aligned, but you reach that kid that otherwise was like, well, whatever, I don't care about stupid Ms. Myers in English class. Wait, actually, maybe they did today. That's huge, right? That's an enormous. And Kate has said in the past, if I can quote her, like that's what's so exciting about the pandemic offered this opportunity for all of us to kind of rethink this. And there were so many cases where, forgive me for speaking for you, Kate, she felt like kids were reaching things and discovering things, and her own teaching was expanding. That's where it is. Like that's where, to me, the magic is, that it's this opportunity, but you're going to get lost if all you're doing is judging yourself by your failures to meet any of these,
Absolutely.
like bars.
Yeah.
I think I naturally, without knowing it, use the Triple E model just because it lines up so closely with other pedagogical models that we use as classroom teachers. So your inquiry based or your backwards design, it just lines up so nicely with that when I looked at that, I was like, oh yeah, this just lines up exactly with all the thinking that I already do when planning learning experiences for my students. also because I'm very familiar with the SAMR model, because like I said, as a classroom teacher, it was really the only model that was ever presented to me. So I think that that's always in the background. Like I'm always looking for something that's going to transform what it is that we're doing, and it doesn't obviously happen every day. I'm not transforming every single lesson, redefining everything as I go, but I'm always looking for ways to redefine. And in fact, it's how I've come to develop some of my favorite learning experiences that I have developed for my students. So I think just naturally, I think in those two ways. As an integrator, I'm not going to say I love the SAMR model as an integrator, but I love the other models because they speak to varying levels of teacher readiness. And I think that that's really important as an instructional coach, as an integrator, to know, to understand that all of your educators, all of your teachers in your building or your district or whoever you're working with, they all have varying levels of readiness. And so some teachers are ready for the TIM model matrix right at the beginning, and some, like PICRAT, is going to be the perfect starting place. And so as an integrator or a coach, having all of these different models in your pocket, I think is perfect, because you can blend them, you can use them as your teachers are ready. And so I think, there are different ways to view, different lenses to view them from that will make them appropriate or not.
It's like a SAMR inception, where we've got our own SAMR for integrating technology for other teachers. We got to figure out entry points and all of that for teachers as well, about what they're most comfortable with and how deep to go with them. Yep, absolutely.
I just want to add one more thing as we're thinking about integrating technology and obviously wanting to find success and want students to be engaged. I think it's super important, and I've been stressing this in every PD I've been doing for the last month and a half after I had this aha moment, that we want to make sure when you're introducing new technology that you're not simultaneously introducing new content. If you want to be successful with technology in your classroom, make sure. And so sometimes, and I bring this up because maybe this lesson isn't transformative, but students need an opportunity to work with this piece of technology. And conversely, don't introduce new content, if the students don't have chance to work with the technology. You can't do both at the same time. So make sure when you are doing all this and you're choosing tools that maybe students don't have a lot of experience with, make sure that you are in your lesson planning, that you are making space for them to either know the content, then learn the technology, already have prior knowledge with the technology to then introduce the content, so that they're not trying to do both at the same time, because you're setting yourself and everybody else up for a lot of frustration and failure. And then it becomes the assessment piece. Like, what am I assessing? Am I assessing how well they knew the tool, or how well they knew the content? Because sometimes it's hard to tease those apart if you don't think kids have a good command over either one of
Very
them.
true. Very true.
Can I build onto that? Rob, will
Yeah,
you
finish it up for us, Kate. Wrap that all up.
because this is professional development that I'm developing for later around edu protocols, which calls for exactly what Holly said her aha moment was, and they call it a smart start. We learned about it as educators heading into 2020. So you pick the few tech tools that you really need students to know in your class, and you spend the first week or two doing content light, but maybe tech heavy. So we're going to learn how to use Google Slides, because I know we're going to be doing a lot of Google Slides presentations, but instead of doing a presentation on some content that I'm going to teach you, we're going to do something silly or something that you already know a lot about, right? So that you keep the cognitive load low in one area, but high in another. I'll just add that onto what Holly said, because that's exactly what edu protocols it calls for and supports teachers in doing.
Could you just advance one more slide now?
Yep.
And look at you, Kate, plugging yourself for your next PD.
Smart.
Way to go. I like that.
It all comes together.
Right. So this one, I was just going to put out this thing on the bottom, the history.org EE practice is a really great resource for this. But this, we're going to wrap up with that concept of student-centeredness and the check in to see how effective any of these models are. I love the simplicity of this question. Is there value added to learning goals in this lesson by using technology compared to what I would do without technology? And I think one of the ways I flabbergast people from time to time, there are many, but one is that I say, so why don't we not use technology for this lesson? It doesn't sound like it's helping. And they look at me like I'm nuts. They're like, but you're the tech integrator. I'm like, right, but this is awesome that we're able to, the four of us in 4 different places right now are able to use a Jamboard to do this ideation, this conversation. But if we're in person, I would 150% be doing this on a board with Post-its, right? And that's where kids are looking at me like when I'll come in and teach something physical, like I'll do Legos with them, right? And they're like, Mr. Warner, what, this isn't technology. Like, I know. Of course, I have some technological goal in the back of my mind that I'm not sharing with them yet because I'm just that kind of guy. But there is this sense that similar to not wedding yourself to a particular model, being willing to step back entirely and like not wed yourself to technology, ask yourself the question, is that really the best approach to this lesson? Because if the answer to Liz's question is not yes, then forget all the frameworks, forget the tech tool that day, because you've been ignoring the central goal of the kid learning. So that to me, when I heard her say that, I was in a session where she was talking about it, and I didn't put together that she was this person because it was a little while ago. But I remember hearing her say, ask yourself the question, is technology actually useful to the situation? And that may help you pick your framework, may help you pick your tool. Almost like the 0 level question before you ask any of the others.
Yep. Right. And that's one nice thing too with that SAMR model too. It has that built in there that says that no tech on that one diagram. Right. I like that piece of it too. I forgot to mention that earlier. Awesome. Well, great insight. I think you guys great conversations. Hopefully people watching this, that you're able to, you know, find your own thoughts amongst ours, and you're also able to use them to, you know, kind of build off of conversations for yourself and you and your colleagues. We thank you for joining this as always. You know, you can find that PD series calendar at the main DOE site for searching spring training. This will be linked in the PDF that ends up getting shared with this video, so you can find it in the comments. And then you have your usual contact hour form and certificate linked there as well. So thank you all.
I was going to say one more thing.
Yeah.
Because we're not in Zoom, our names aren't showing up, I realized. So we should have said at the beginning.
Sorry.
Hi,
Yes,
I'm Jonathan Warner.
You're right. It's not.
So for each of us, if you do our first name dot last name, that's our email addresses. So I'm jonathan.warner@maine.gov.
Yeah. I'll type this in. I'll type it in and put it in the PDF when I go to publish it with the PDF instead of drop it in right now for everybody out there to see.
Yeah,
Yes,
that makes sense.
Good call. Then we're right with this recording.
I just looked up and I was like, oh, I don't know.
Yep.
But I know who we are.
I will put your guys' links and your spring training cards on a slide here for everybody as well. Just All right. Well, thank you all, and thank you,
Thanks, Rob.
fellow ambassadors.
Thanks for having us.
I'll stop the recording. Awesome.